conversation in the sense that as an entrepreneur, are national companies in areas where you operate doing enough to support local entrepreneurs? And if they are not, what would you as an entrepreneur seek? What would you want them to do to promote to promote local suppliers and local content?
That is a catch-22 scenario. The national oil companies would always want to promulgate local content, but let's be sincere. I think local content always starts with IOCs. By the time it gets to the level of the national oil companies, between them and the regulators, I think they throw out the book. So that's my own sincere situation. And that's what I see mostly that happens in Africa. Now, the national oil companies basically have one rule book. They have a rule book for themselves and they have a rule book for the IOCs. As much as it is, what tends to happen is that most of the national oil companies are in JV agreements with the IOCs, which means most of the IOCs are either the ones actually running or operating most of the oil platforms, both onshore and offshore, on the upstream side. And you find that most of the national oil companies tend not to be operators of the actual platforms. So it changes a bit of the dynamics on the upstream oil and gas. But with regards to the downstream, you find most of the NOCs participate more on downstream than actually on upstream operation. Now, in terms of local content aspect of it, both sides, up and down, upstream and downstream, I'll say the NOCs, in our case, the NNPC, needs to do a lot more when it comes to local content. As much as it is, they do try to practice as much local content as they can, but you don't get the benefit as you see more strictly adhered to with most of the IOCs than the NOCs. And not only the NOCs, you have marginal field owners that are local owners also. And in the case of Nigeria, I think over the last, I'll say, 20 years, we've moved a lot of marginal field ownership to indigenous owners and local operators. And it also has had its, I'll say it had its difficulties in terms of implementing more local content through the marginal field owners. So the same similarities you have with NOCs is the same similarities you have with marginal field owners. And I think that we need to see a lot more impactful directions from the local NOCs on local content. I think they play more of a lip service to local content than they should play in the area of local content. And I'm not sure what the other views are in other countries, but I think because of, you find that most of the time, the national oil companies and the regulators, there's really a thin line between them. And that means it's difficult for the regulator to actually either monitor or force the NOC to adhere to local content rules or regulations, because they're all interlinked government agencies or interlinked colleagues in the industry, and you have a problem. But when it comes to the operators, now I'll say in the case of Nigeria, the lucky case of most of the big JV contracts are operated by the IOCs. So most of the NOCs tend to step back to allow the IOCs to do their job. And so they're very happy to allow local content laws to work. So that I think it's in our case. So I see the positives on there, but the negatives are always where the regulators, which are government or regulators, and the NOCs in most of the African countries, when you find out that they're also government owned, because it's very hard to find NOCs that are privately, I'll say, equity participation is majorly private than local. We have one or two type of gas projects that are majority private sector driven, which is mostly the IOCs also, like the NLNG project, which is 49% owned by the combination of IOCs and 49% owned by NNPC, which is our own Nigerian NOC. And that is a very successful private company that's come up in history of well, and also are very, very good in terms of local content participation. Given the fact that we're also talking about the current Train 7 project, which is a multi-billion-dollar project, which is having a lot more participation in local content. So for me, NOCs are evolving government quasi issues, and they can do a lot better than they're doing. Ours is still needs to do a lot better than it's doing. They are improving on local content, but they have a long way to go compared to the rules guiding most of the IOC operators.
I mean, George, thank you very much, and you are right that most NOCs are definitely government owned, and we have seen serious ones across the world. And you mentioned regulator, and I know Natalia presented along those lines earlier. And then I would want to bring her and ask her, or bring this conversation into the local content policy debate. What kind of policies, Natalia, should we be, or should you in Mozambique and generally in the world, should regulators be working in terms of, stimulating local content under the current circumstances?
Thank you, Joy. Well, in Mozambique, as you know, we don't have yet a local content policy or strategy. This is in progress now. And even the local content bill, it's also in progress. Sometimes there are situations that governments need to take the window of opportunity, and many times they are not prepared to have in place local content policies or strategies, but they have in a lot of different instruments, regulatory instruments. What we have now, it's a petroleum law with a lot of information and orientations regarding local content. We also establish a decree law at the Rovuma Basin, where we do have the main LNG project. It's a special regime that also contains a lot of procedures for local content obligations. Obviously, it's very difficult to implement this, but in that instruments, we do have an obligation to provide and approve separately a local content plan. A local content plan includes a local content procurement plan, extensive procurement plan, workforce plan, and also a plan to transfer knowledge and technology and capacity building. So with this, what we are working now, it's case by case, actually. We are putting in place also monitoring for the implementation of those plans. We don't have yet targets and targets, I can say targets. It's very difficult to have targets when you don't have the industrial base study of the country. This is actually should be the first thing that one country has to have when they want to approve any plan of development pertaining exploration of their resource. This should be the first one, an industrial baseline for the country in order to assess what are the capabilities, and then you will have the demand plan. With that, you will see what are the gaps and with the gaps, you will see what strategy you will need to take in order to get more benefits of your local capacity and bring a policy and a strategy to maximize local content.
I will ask you at this point, Natalia, based on what you have said. There are major projects coming up in Mozambique, in area 1 and Rufuma Basin. The question is then, what will suppliers be looking at? Those who want to get involved in those projects, what will you use as a regulator or an institute? What will you use to manage that?
Yes, I'm coming to this point. That's what I'm saying, that we have the sense that this should be the first thing. So what we are doing is to try to put all the information in order to get this kind of strategy to maximize local content. The first thing that we are doing, it's on the procurement side of the goods and service. Most of the package that we do have are very long item package, and they are bundling package. So we are trying, no, we are not trying, we are actually breaking down those contracts in order that the local companies can have opportunity to participate first. Second one, we are ring fencing some opportunity for nationals. Where we do know that there is capacity, those opportunities are only for nationals. Third thing, for the two projects, the main ones, the two things that we did is to reserve $2.5 billion to be used in country with local companies. One of the projects is $20 billion. $2.5 billion of dollars will be spent locally in Mozambique. The other project is 23 billion. 3 billion will be spent locally. Another thing is also when it comes to the procurement, to the capacity of the local companies, the IOCs, the operators, they need to have two things. One, it's the development of suppliers. They will need to train the suppliers, and this is happening. They are training their local suppliers, and also they are putting in place a fund in order to finance and help with that constraint, which is the access to finance. We are using first the local suppliers, and we are using also some of the financial institutions to see what are the best rates to access finance for the local companies in Mozambique. A part of this, there is a huge difficult on the understanding the procurement of oil and gas, the standards, and all the stuffs. What we are developing, this is not yet developed, but it's the codes of practices of procurement for oil and gas. Oil and gas, local companies, they need to understand, and they need to be rated against, how can I say, foreign companies that are registered in Mozambique. In order to do this, there have to be a code of practices that everyone knows how the procurement is done by each of the companies. We have some complaints in Mozambique regarding the access of opportunity from the local companies. So we believe that this code of practices will really help local companies to be involved. A part of this, we also have the supplier. It's a kind of creation of the national suppliers registration, and also talents database for the oil and gas talents. So we believe that these two components will bring visibility for the local companies that have capacity to provide the goods and service in the oil and gas. And along with this, the local content bill, it's being prepared. The monitoring instruments also are being released, and also the report of the local content annual plan is being also established in order to the companies can provide their reports to the authorities. So those are the in general the main things that we have in place in order to ensure that local companies can participate in oil and gas projects.
Susan, you are involved in the development of local content policies, working with an independent IOC. The question is, what policies can be implemented right now under the current circumstances to stimulate local content?
Thank you, Joe, for that question. And I would say, because again, not starting from scratch, so you've already established local content policies. And the policies were looking at a point in time when you had started operations. Of course, in Kenya, we have not hit FID. So we are still in the exploration and appraisal phase. And therefore, the policies that were put in place at that time was to try and identify areas that local businesses are quite capable to provide goods and services to the operations at that time. Now, COVID has happened, and with COVID, as you've said, some things have reset themselves. So I would say that it's a time for us, it's a time for the IOCs rather, to revisit their local content policies and identify areas that have now been identified as being potential for local content, because the local businesses have been able to identify the opportunities for themselves. They've been able to build capacity and capability rather quickly. And the fact that the standards are being met, revisit your policy and make sure that you're not then going to revert back or revert to the imported goods and services that you were initially procuring. And if we do this, and of course, local content makes sense, yeah, for IOCs. It makes sense because it should be cheaper. The lead time for procuring this is going to be faster. So it does make business sense. So I'd see that the ability may be a challenge, because the question would be, would these requirements be sustained in the long term? And I'd therefore, that would call for applying of the strategic thinking, because you can also create demand for some of these services. You can create demand for some of these skill set that you're seeing coming up. So I'd challenge as well at a government level to ensure that they are also broadening their local content policies to make sure that the gains that we have seen during this COVID situation are sustained. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I want to take us to a question on what the role entrepreneurs can play, and how, you know, the operators, the regulator, and national companies can help the entrepreneurs. And I'll start with you, George, because you are the entrepreneur. What should entrepreneurs expect from all these stakeholders? What should you expect from IOCs? What do you expect from NOCs? And what do you expect from regulators to ensure that you are able to participate in the oil and gas sector?
I think for an entrepreneur, first and foremost is, I'll say there should be standardization. The standardization between the IOCs and the NOCs and every stakeholder within the oil and gas sector on local content. Standardization in terms of vendor registration, standardization in terms of equipment, in terms of materials, in terms of supply chain elements, and in terms of requirements of what it takes for you to actually be a vendor to an oil and gas company. I think that should be first criteria that we should first be looking at. Because if there's no standardization from one business to the next business, then you're having too many levels of standards. Then you have a problem. Then then the regulators or the policy on local content also gets mismatched because there's no standardization between the products. So if you're doing pipes, if you're doing electricals, what is the standards from one company? There are international standards for all these products, but then when you find out the entries to the vendor registration, needs to be standardized. I think that will be very key to getting local content practices in each country improving or being a lot better at higher level. Secondly, I see that we need to get more regulators to actually do better than what they're doing in terms of encouraging local content. Because now, if you look at it, the scenario is we're moving from a global world to a more localized source of guarantees. So where you're having more localization of products or production or localization of supply chain in order to create, to reduce the risk element of guarantees or supply chain, whether long lead time or short lead time items. So we should see more post-COVID, I think, of more localization of supply chain, not just because of local content drive around the world, but also because of the actual risk adverseness now of not having a local source for an item that might end up being locked down in another country, or there's a lockdown exposure happening like we had with COVID. So I see that as a key requirement to getting things improving on the local content, to getting entrepreneurs actually being able to invest rightly into different types of businesses that are going to be on the supply chain end. And then secondly, there must be, I'll say, more focused encouragement into business development or into generating those local contents. Now, what I mean by that is that now it is not a case whereby until we actually have in-country capacity, do we encourage in-country capacity. I'm happy that what Natalia said of certain investments and certain amount of investment carved out into local participation or local sourcing. Now, there must be a deliberate drive to getting local content happening country by country. If there's no deliberate drive, you're not going to get entrepreneurs being able to get there, because in most likely cases, you might have country deficient issues or infrastructural deficiencies from one country to the other, which might make cost variances happen. So the mere fact that I can produce that in any country does not mean that you produce as efficiently as another, or the resources available in another country might be enough to guarantee that your price level or your price competitiveness might be good enough. So those are things you need. If you do not then force or guarantee local participation, you will not get that local involvement. And once you don't get enough local involvement, you won't get growth in local content. You won't get entrepreneurs, because I don't know entrepreneurs invest in anything to actually lose money or to end up, they're not government agents, they're private sector driven. And so nobody would go and fund, or neither with the finance sector, fund a project that is going to go down after it's funded. So nobody's in business to lose money. We're all in business, especially for the entrepreneur, to actually yield profit and make an earning, just like anybody else. Now, so for anybody participating in those local content, they're looking for the ability to guarantee profitability and guarantee continuity of their business. So be it. It is necessary during the early stages, is for most countries, is for them to actually focus on driving local content, compelling a drive to local content, compelling a drive to local content areas where they see there might be synergy or there might be growth potential in that sector, in that area, in that country, which would then in turn create those employment or create opportunities for local spend of the actual money. And so that is what will create growth in local content. So I'm talking from an entrepreneur perspective, and these are the key things that make us, for those of us that have invested in the oil and gas sector as an industry, those are the key drivers that will keep us being encouraged to be driving our investment or our vision towards those type of investments that would guarantee those type of volumes or see us participating in more oil and gas sectors.
I mean, thank you very much, George. It's very good to hear that from somebody who is actually actively investing in the industry, and the panelists have had it. And I want to come to you, Iliana, as we close. As you give your closing remarks, I would also want to ask you specifically what you at ExxonMobil are doing to support entrepreneurs, and then you can give your closing remarks as what you see as a way forward.
Thank you, Joe. Well, to close, I want to talk about our experience and what we do in ExxonMobil in supporting entrepreneurs in different areas. Two examples. One is Guyana. And we have, of course, as you know, a big operation in Guyana. And we actually established an enterprise development center or a center for local business development. And there actually, most of the activities or areas that are part of the objective of this center is to support entrepreneurship, to support new ventures, new suppliers that actually want to set up their own business. Things like even providing a computer where they can actually set up and provide information or kind of how to get certified. So that has been a place where entrepreneurs have can go to do that. Also, it also has been served as an incubator for new business and potential business. The other area where we support a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's kind of part of my role also as Global Supply Diversity Manager for ExxonMobil, is that we support a lot of women-owned businesses, so women entrepreneurs. And this is, we do it in conjunction and with support of We Connect International. So, and we have partnerships with We Connect International in all the countries where we operate. So we're very big in Africa, South Africa. We have done a lot of activities in Nigeria. We're looking forward to bringing it to Mozambique and then eventually to Ghana, Mauritania. But it's very big in Canada and also in Brazil and then in Colombia. Likewise in countries like in Japan, Singapore. So ExxonMobil has a program which is a Women Economic Empowerment. And that's where actually we support a lot of the entrepreneurship from women in that area. So thank you, Joe, for letting me be in this panel, and I'll pass it on to you. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, and I'm gonna come to Susan. What do you think, or what do you see in your closing remarks as the way forward for local content discussion and local content in every country?
Thank you, Joe. What I have seen done well, and this is globally, is the stimulus packages that governments have put in place. And this is to support the businesses to try and survive or to try and pull through this really difficult period. So I would say that as a result of the stimulus packages, and some of them have been very focused on SMEs, I would say because SMEs have also been identified as the ones driving the economic growth of countries, there should not be a full stop when COVID ceases to be a crisis. I'd really want to see that the gains that have been made being a stepping stone to what else can be done to get these small and medium-sized enterprises to move to the next level. Because indeed, GDP needs to grow, and GDP will only grow if we increase the goods that are being manufactured in our countries, if we increase the kind of services that the countries are able to produce themselves. So this is an area that I would definitely want to see as a continuous review initiative for governments. Another opportunity that I see is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement that was signed by a number of countries in Africa. And we've mentioned in our discussions in the panel that borders have been closed to international travel especially. And for me, the question is, what opportunities are we seeing then enabling Africa to pull together to create that economic bloc? Because we have the population, we have the numbers, and we have the needs. I believe we also have the resources, and we have the capacity to be able to explore and exploit our resources. So rather than look at the markets out there, what is it? How do we start seeing other countries as market producers for us, or even as raw material providers for us? So this is an area that I'd also want to see, moving forward, being developed further, because I believe that Africa has a lot to offer the world, and this is our time. Thank you very much for the opportunity to sit in this local content panel.
Margaret, what do you think? What do you see as the way forward? What does your eyeballs tell you? What should we expect going forward in local content?
Thank you, Joe. I think it's actually an opportunity for us to have this kind of discussion on a panel like this. I want to totally agree with Susan. I listed down a few things here, but she has just hit at one point that I wanted to talk about, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We've been talking about local contents. So like someone puts it, local content is an idea whose time has come. This is the time for it. Like all over the world, in the United States, there is America first, right? America first is what is going on in the US. In Norway, in Brazil, just a few days ago, agreed to open up its natural gas infrastructure and allow other players to come in local suppliers to come in and play in that sector. So no longer Petrobras handling that. Petrobras is an NOC, but they are trying to open up that sector to allow for more players. That is also increasing local content, local capacity on the job. So if you look at it globally, people are taking steps. So if all these other continents are saying America first, Norway first, Brazil first, what is Africa doing? Like, is there an Africa first? So that is where my agreement with Susan comes in with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We have to make it work. This is the time where we need to put every other thing aside. George has mentioned standardization, very, very important. And then the free trade agreement must capture the oil and gas industry very succinctly in a manner that indicates that the oil producing countries in Africa needs to be, embedded in that agreement, such that we can now export, do trade within each other in oil and gas, supplying talent, supplying local suppliers and vendors can have this free agreement within the continent and make impact. So if this happens, then we can now say, yes, we are beginning to work on something. Another thing I look at that could be very critical is the aspect of funding. The aspect of funding for local content, which is like kind of cost effective. Very, very expensive, like capital intensive. But if the government, if we work at it, providing that cushion for local suppliers, it will go a long way. So in Nigeria had a funding of 200 million, but just 2 days ago, the Nigerian Content Board increased that funding to 350 million naira, which is a boost to local suppliers, a boost to increasing local content in the country. And we are seeing a lot of things happening. We're seeing they're putting funding 50 million naira for research and development. We're seeing transparency coming from the NNPC. For the first time in 43 years, the National Oil Company in Nigeria opened his audit account and allowed the world to see that this is NNPC being transparent, right? That is something that's happening. There's a Ajaokuta pipeline that is also being flagged up. That is going to create more jobs for Nigerians and indigenous companies in Africa. But so we know that these talents are there. We know that capacity exists. How do we now open this up to engage others, maybe cross-boundary, to ensure that we have this shared, this collaboration that will ensure that we ready and prepared, and we'll not find ourselves caught up in the net of it all. So for me, I think that it's time local content needs to take the center stage. We need to put the trust in our local suppliers. We need to ensure, we know there's competency. George is here, his company has done a lot and is even spreading across Africa. If the other countries in Africa does not trust his competency, they won't open their borders to him. But he has delivered several times. He's into manufacturing. It's not easy to be a manufacturer in the country where you have a lot of problems like power and all that, which is something we also need to look into, like energy efficiency, power. How does that affect this local content and local manufacturers to thrive? So we have to look into that, put more confidence in our local suppliers, ensure that they are standardized, they meet the status. And then for IOCs now, doing what they, practicing what they preach and trying to make the environment more conducive, for their suppliers, ensuring that they put that trust enough to carry on to make sure that they are there. Because at the end of the day, local content is good business, with either way you look at it. But at this point in time, it's going to even help those, IOCs coming from outside, because now it's going to be more even expensive to bring in workforce from outside. And so if you engage your supplier chain, you're going to cut off a lot of expenses from that part. So thank you very much. It's been a very, very interesting session. And I hope that whatever we discuss here is going to really make an impact in changing our view of local content, not just in Africa, but across the world where African interest is being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And I'm going to come to you, Natalia. As we close, what do you see as a way forward for local content, not just in Mozambique, Africa, but as an industry as a whole?
Okay, thank you, Joy. Well, first of all, I think that just like everybody said, local content has a huge potential to increase the economic development, by the sense that it will use the local resource of the host country, and this can be done also by creating capacity building on the local suppliers, on the local talents of those countries, on linking the economic and strategic sectors of the economy to the value chain of the oil and gas industry, and as well domicile a lot of the service needed for the oil and gas industry. There is a lot of opportunities that companies can do, that countries can do this, but there is a need to have a strategy, a clear strategy, a clear approach to do this. And I also think that, as George said, everyone wants to gain. The oil and gas companies, most of them, the operators, sometimes they think that investing in local content might increase the cost of the project. When you have a shared value creation, an approach, a balanced approach that at the same time shows that there is project competitiveness, and there is also project competitiveness for the benefit of the IOCs, and there is also economic development of the country, ensuring that the local communities can really get benefit from the exploration of this resource. You have at least the basics to start maximizing local content strategy or policy, or local content success implementation. What I think that this is where most of all fail. Without a strategic approach of local content, without clear responsibilities of each of the stakeholders, because what we see now, I will use some of the countries that I've been seeing, there is no governance regarding local content. You don't know who does what. There is role for everyone. There is role for the regulators, for the governments, for the IOCs, for the NOCs, for the business associations. Everyone needs to know what they have to do, and this is established on that strategy. Along with this, which is part that we are trying to do now, as we don't have that policy, we are trying to create a governance, a local content governance. What are the responsibilities? What is the mapping of the key stakeholders involved on this? What is their role? What is their responsibility? Second, what they have to do in order to maximize or to do the responsibility that it's committed to them. Third, what is the elements that we need to put in place to monitor and enforce the local content law? Second, what could be the interaction, the coordination, and the planning among all the main stakeholders involved? So for the case of Mozambique, we are trying to look for the different experience that we have seen regarding this to put in place these elements that I mentioned to you. It's not easy. We do know it's a huge investment coming at the same, but I don't think that we have to sprint now. This is a marathon. We have an investment of, almost 50 billions. And for the development phase, it's almost 20 years. So we are trying to put in place this in order to have a clear vision and give that clear vision to the main stakeholders in this process. And it's a challenge. We are learning from different institutions. We are putting in place also a lot of instruments to get in touch with the main implementers like Uganda, Ghana, especially Nigeria. Nigeria has a huge experience on this, and to see how can we really, based in the fact that we have, how can we absorb and work together as African and as also a nation. So thank you, Joy. I will just leave this points, and thank you for this invitation. And we hope we can continue to have more discussions like this in order to get more information to align what we are putting in place.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And it's been an honor having you, George. Your closing remarks and what you see going forward in terms of local content.
I think in order for me as a closing remark, I think for us all is one key thing is to actually see that we need to continue to encourage globally local content. Every country or every continent is at different levels of local content participation. But then we need to also encourage local content as a local content and not globalized local content as well thought of previously. And I think key participation from the local content teams, key participation from the local content managers, because most companies, both IOCs and NOCs, have local content managers. I think we need to also support local content managers and the viewpoint from most of the local content managers. And as I've said, it is not, you find that most local content managers are not departments where the IOCs or the NOCs are touting or are extremely pushing. So sometimes you actually have to admit to that they don't get a thank you job, but they are still a necessity. So we need to continue to encourage all IOCs, NOCs to have local content department or development managers, because you cannot develop local content unless you have drivers. And those drivers are a necessity in the business of today. So each AOCs, each NOCs must have continuous growth and development in the areas of local content within their actual organization, so that we can see these actual achievements being done outside their actual organization. Secondly, I think the areas of the oil and gas financing is also key to the future of local content, because certain countries have better financing structures for oil and gas, especially for areas where you actually find that they're actually capital intensive in terms of entry. And when those entries are capital intensive, it limits the entries. Now, so how do you guarantee local content when the financial implications are beyond some majority of your locals? So those are that's another key area which there must be a sort of joint or singular or national driven local content financing drive in order to create capacity, because it's not only training or fabrications or labor, because I think sometimes we find out that a lot of local content are so focused on man hours rather than actually added value products. So, and yes, you have fabrication yards that create a lot of man hours, but you cannot just look at man hours. You must also look at products times also, well, production of products that are used in the oil and gas sector. So those will drive local content. It will also drive entrepreneurs to be more at ease with the financing costs. Secondly, also, thirdly, you're looking at the areas that have to do with the working capital finance. So you have capex, which is long term. You have working capital, which is maybe short term, maximum 12 months. And those are also big constraints, because there's some oil and gas projects or tenders that sincerely sometimes when you look at the value are beyond the locals. And now, so how do they finance working capital element, even if they have capacity? So you really, as an entrepreneur, do not want to take on one contract and end up closing your business after the contract, because your cash flow runs out in between it, and you're not able to actually sustain the delivery or the deliverables. It ends up killing the business. So working capital finance also, I'll say, is very key to most local content development, apart from the capex. So that will enable most tenders or most jobs that are won by the locals being guaranteed to be finished. So I'll say if we continue to focus, and I'm happy that this program is focusing on local content, I think if we continue to focus on local content globally, I think that will be a good source for most IOCs and NOCs to actually be able to develop their long-term strategy, manpower, long-term strategy development of their projects. And if they continue to focus on that, you'll find out that a lot of projects, though, will still need global input. You find out that you have a lot more capacity development from each local area of business, each local country, each national country, being able to develop good level, capable capacity in order to actually be able to be now more competitive between themselves. And at the long run, I think for the IOCs, it will drive down their cost. And it might look high at the beginning, but on the long run, you always find that in any project or in any development, the early stage of development in any country, it's costly at the end of the day. But the long-term end of it, the more development you have, the more developed you are on that product, the more efficient you get. The more efficient you get, the more cost-effective you get. The more cost-effective you get, the more competitive you are. And the more competitive your local content is, the better the drive. So that to me will be my own